Welcome, 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 everyone. Come one, come all, wherever you are, and meet the old lady who they let be the host of this show. Am I old? No. Do I sometimes feel old after traveling last week? Yeah, I do. That's interesting. We can all explore that in another talk when we talk about unlearning ageism. Because anyway, see, I'm on a tangent already. Let's give people a couple of moments to arrive, fully find their way into this moment, into this space. We are here to talk about unlearning ableism. I'm your host, Lindsey T.H. Jackson, and we have an amazing panel. I'm sure all of you have already started following them thanks to the direction of our great producer, Director of Buzz and Hype at LTHJ Global and Sojourn DEI, Laura Kay. If you're not already following them, after this session, you're going to be following them and gently following them around the local city, trying to like, should you be my friend? Anyway, are we here? I see some faces. Let me look at you. I haven't looked at you for at least a week now. Oh, you look fantastic. Oh my God, B's like, see, Kim said, I'm on my balance board. B's like actually exercising in their room. All righty, take an example. I love it. If this is your first time here, let's go over a couple of housekeeping. First of all, already you can see Junie Castaway joining us from Pro Bono. ASL is underway. We also have live transcript running via the caption. So if you go down to the bottom of your Zoom screen, you can click on that CC and turn on live captions. You can also tune it to different languages. I want to say the technology is not necessarily where we would like it right now, but it is an option if it would improve your experience to be following along in captions in Spanish or French or another beautiful language, please do so. Live ASL interpretation is provided, as always, by our friends and partners at Pro Bono ASL. If you are not adding ASL into your events, please do so. And you can reach out to Pro Bono ASL. All of their details are always in the materials that we send out afterwards. You can also find them on LinkedIn. You can also, can you Google Pro Bono ASL, okay? And that would bring it up. Yeah, it's that easy. All right. Community guidelines. If you haven't read our community guidelines, please do so and take a moment to really absorb, because this can be a little bit strange. We're in a space where we want to have different ideas. We want to be engaging across difference. And for some of us, we've never experienced that. We've mostly existed in homogeneity. Everybody thinks like us, acts like us, believes like us, worships like us, is on their treadmill like us. But we are in a space where we are engaging across diversity. And so we need some guidelines to remind ourselves how we do that. We are recording, and as much as I would love this to be like American Idol or So You Think You Can Dance, Laura tells me constantly that that is not the goal here. And so you unfortunately will not be shown on the recording. It is just me and the panelists. Unless you ask a question, which I know you're going to have so many burning questions at the end of this session, in which case you will come onto screen. If you do not want to be on screen, you can share your question in the chat window and we will still try to get those answered. As always, please take a moment at the end of the session and respond to our reflection questions that we send out. We want to hear from you. Some of the feedback that has been coming through has been amazing. Many people have asked for me to sing more. We'll see. That will require more of a warm up and not going from literally a meeting with a client straight into this session. But Jacob Lucky, oh my God, Jacob used to be one of my managers. Tangent, and we're back. But will singing more happen in the future? I don't know. What else do you want to happen? Please take a moment and share your reflections with us. There is our shameless plug for Pro Bono ASL. Ooh, Junie, we should come up with a theme song for Pro Bono ASL, and then I could sing it right now, and then that would meet everybody's needs of me singing more. Yeah. Take action. If you are looking to get started with your DEI journey at your organization and budget has been a problem, or you've been Googling and you've been on LinkedIn following all of our favorite speakers and you're like, I just don't know what to do. Hey, go to sojourndei.com. We have built out step-by-step what to do, when to do it, how to do it, and then built all the tools in there for you to do it. So check that out. If you haven't been to sojourndei.com before, you can start with a freemium account. And then when you're ready to really move from talk to action, everything will be there when you need it. But if you need more than just a guide, you really need somebody to come into your organization to take you step by step in a more engaged consulting manner. You can also reach out to us via LTHJ Global, where we can help you build out end-to-end initiatives, come in as fractional DEI leaders to help support your organization at that senior level. And we are really there to help you one day at a time to really move the needle. This is often more for larger organizations, enterprise levels that are really ready to have that senior strategic level support exactly when and where you need it. As always, let's take a breath together. Martha, don't put your hands together because I see you're driving. Everybody, are you driving? Are you not driving? Are you maybe driving? Okay, be safe. Let's all take a deep breath together, inhaling in and exhaling out. Let's bring ourselves fully into this space, leaving the demands of the day aside for just one moment so that we can unlearn together. Welcome to this amazing and beautiful panel. We have Kim American, we have Merlin Starr, we have Seamus Hart here to talk to us about unlearning ableism. Kim American, a human person who exists at the intersection of womanhood, autism, fatness, and probably many other things, but those are the ones that impact her day to day most. She has spent most of her career in justice-oriented communications and marketing and is deeply passionate about ethical storytelling and truth in marketing. Outside of work, you can find her playing hockey, surfing, or as she puts it, at least trying to, paddleboarding, swimming, exploring outdoors, low-key chasing coastal storms, and advocating for inclusivity. Everybody give a big, warm welcome to the Kim American. Welcome, Kim. Thank you for being here. Let me introduce Merlin Starr, joining us on the virtual couch. Merlin Starr, a non-binary Black neurodivergent individual that fights racism, loves mathematics, and frequently reads. Merlin holds a bachelor's degree in mathematics and a master's in quantitative psychology. We are going to nerd out so much. Learn more about them at merlinjstarr.com and on the website Autism and Intersectionality, where they bring an intersectional lens to organizations and individuals who are ready to become more inclusive of neurodiversity. Everybody give a great welcome to Merlin Starr, please. Hello, Merlin. Thank you for being here. We're waking everybody up by making them hand clap or give us yes. And let us meet Seamus Hart. Seamus Hart and I just connected on divorce and finding our love of our life, who makes us rethink everything we thought about love. But they also are a UX lead at the intersection of autism advocacy and cutting edge user experience design. You can find Seamus's incredibly open, honest writing about his experience as an autistic person in his personal life and work on Medium. Experience his work with Autism Awareness Australia, his UXD at Qantas on LinkedIn, or read his personal Medium articles here, which you'll be able to find in the deck after our session. Welcome, Seamus Hart, please, everybody. Hello, Seamus. Alrighty. Let us come up on to the virtual couch, Seamus, Kim, and Merlin, and kick this off. I want to start, Kim, a few years ago, I was, maybe, was that a few years ago? Maybe it was just a year ago. I was interviewing you for my book, and you said this thing that it comes up into my mind again and again and again, and it just moves me. And you said one of the things about COVID and being in or on lockdown was that you missed the sound of your friends' voices on your skin. I miss the sound of my friends' voices on my skin. And not only is that some of the most beautiful poetry that I've ever heard, but two, I was struck in that moment at how little I understood it. I felt as though I didn't have my own frame of reference to understand that experience. And that leads me today to start our conversation on what are the things about living with autism that either you think so many people in their own life moving through the world in an ableist society, in what we consider an ableist existence, what have they failed to understand about your experience? I'm starting with easy questions, as you can tell. Yes, you.
Are you asking me or generally?
I'm asking you, and then I'm going to ask the same question to everybody else.
I think just really directly related to that quote is just like, I think a lot of times the sensory issues that come along with autism are viewed as a negative. And they can behave that way too in a world that's not designed for people with sensory issues. They can absolutely create a sense of overwhelm. They can absolutely create a sense of like, I need to get out of here. But they also, for me at least, create this really big and beautiful world that I think like the day I realized that not everyone can feel sound, like my brain broke. I didn't know that that wasn't the common experience. And I just, yeah, I think there's this bigger world out there that I think people on the spectrum, people with sensory differences might get to experience. And in some cases, those differences put us at a functional disadvantage in a world that's not designed for autism. But they can also like make just for like an insanely beautiful world out there. And that's kind of where the idea of that quote came from. Like I have sensory processing disorder in conjunction with I can't say the word synesthesia. And I think the common understanding is that like, oh, you hear a number and you see a color, but really what that is my brain is crisscrossing sensory input. So like when sounds come in, I feel them on my skin as like touch. And that makes for just this really cool sensory experience of the world that I had no idea other people didn't have. But yeah, I just think if that answers the question, that like a common misunderstanding is that autism is a disability. The world is the disability, not the autism.
Oh.
Yes. So, yeah.
This is Lindsey. Everybody grab out your pens right now. We heard it. Kim said it. We're done here. Great session, everybody. We'll see you. What? Merlin. This is Lindsey. Merlin, I saw you really shaking your head there. Kim said, autism isn't the disability. The world is the disability. The lack of understanding of these diverse and in their diversity, beautiful experiences is the disability. Can you expand on that?
Sure. This is a Merlin Star. So basically, to my knowledge of what Kim is going on about, and something I have experienced personally, is that the world is only accommodating to certain folks, and to everyone else, it's not accommodating. Now, to these folks that they were accommodated for, such as their ability to walk and such, everything seems convenient to them because it was literally designed and built for them. So, in other words, we are taking into account their various abilities, what they can do, what they can't do, and cater to those folks. And unfortunately, right now, mostly only to those folks. And so if we design the world in a different sort of way that only catered to other folks, we would see those folks go into a disadvantage and other folks raised to have a certain advantage. So as Kim is going on about with the world being more of the disabling factor, I think that is what she is going about as the general lack of focus on folks like us, on the general, hatred, aversion that is designed by that system, but it doesn't have to be that way.
This is Lindsey. Thank you, Merlin. Again, big word there, that hatred. In these sessions, we have talked about anti-Blackness. We have talked about the hatred of women. Seamus, can you speak to that? What is that hatred of autism, of disability, of these experiences of cognitive diversity that many of us in what we consider to be, or what we call a neurotypical existence, have always been taught to other? What is this hatred?
This is Seamus speaking. It's a really interesting question to unpack. And probably the best way I can explain it is when I went back to studying a few years ago, one of the big things that I found, and this is part of, I guess, as both Kim and Merlin explained, is that part of the understanding autism is understanding the sensory experience. So, for example, talking about the world isn't built for us. I didn't do very well at school. I did extremely poorly all through my junior school to high school. And it wasn't until I got a formal diagnosis, my second formal diagnosis, I can't read under fluorescent lights. Now, I see the flickering, which means I missed out so much academically. And it's not until I actually went and restudied and started doing it under my own terms that I could actually read and kind of understand what they were saying, instead of looking at a book and watching it flicker. It was crazy. It's like no one had ever explained the sensory experience to me, which also brought me into line that I could actually study and gain. I'm currently completing philosophy and psychology degrees. One of the big things that really resonated with me was some works by Frantz Fanon. And what I found is that he talks very specifically about inferiorization, where people are held to a dominant cultural standard. And that's what we're seeing a lot within the neurodiverse space, is that I'm held wherever I work, or if I go shopping, in education, to a neurotypical standard. Now, that's not my standard way of thinking or standard way of functioning, which puts me at a disadvantage. And like Kim and Merlin have explained, it makes things a lot harder. It puts barriers up there that make it very difficult to actually reconcile. It burns me out. I get meltdown. I have sensory problems because I can't process it properly. I'm not in the same position, like as disadvantaged as others, but there's still a barrier, and many like myself, it's a huge challenge. Yeah, so it's interesting hearing everyone else's perspective, that I'm actually not alone in that, and that's why these sessions are so important, actually communicating our needs.
This is Lindsey. Seamus, I wish you could see. I'm seeing what to me seem like, or I'm perceiving to be people going, I had that experience as a child. Seamus, can you tell us, in your words, in your experience, that moment of finally having a diagnosis, of finally having that information, that data, what did that feel like?
This is Seamus speaking. It was very difficult. So I actually had two diagnoses. So I had one in 2007, which was a fairly tentative diagnosis because there wasn't much support. So it was Asperger's. I did not have really a supportive partner at the time, which meant that it was a lot of time working it out on myself, and trying to really, I guess, reconcile what is autism. I didn't really know anyone who was on that. Fast forward to 2017, that's when I got another diagnosis due to some challenges that I had at work. And I managed to find this amazing psychologist who really broke down a lot of sensory problems. And for me, it unlocked a lot of new worlds. So it gave me access to this amazing autism community. I mean, otherwise I wouldn't be connecting with everyone here today and like talking about similar challenges. The other aspect to it was that it actually made sense of things that I struggled with that didn't make any sense. It's like, why can everyone else read? Where it was with me, I couldn't read because of the lights. No one ever told me that.
This is Lindsey. Kim, can you expand on that? What were some of the things when you received your diagnosis that you started to realize, oh wait, this isn't just me, this is a common experience?
Yeah, so I knew for a long time before diagnosis that that's what was going on for me. It was probably, and I laugh because the whole story of getting to the diagnostic point is a little bit laughable. At one point in my early 20s, my roommate, who was a high school counselor, kind of yelled at me after we got in a fight over something stupid, but also something that mattered to me.
This is
She
Lindsey.
like yelled at me while she was leaving.
Want me to kick their ass?
No, it's good.
Give me the name. Put it in the chat window.
But she like yelled while she was walking out the door, like, if you were my student, I would have you diagnosed with Asperger's. And I was like, I don't know what Asperger's is. I grew up actually around a lot of autistic kids. I had a little bit of racket in town babysitting those kids. I wonder why. And then, so I like knew about autism, but I had never heard the label Asperger's. And this was before the DSM-5, before Asperger's was rolled into the autism spectrum. And so like she yelled that at me and I was like, I don't know what she's talking about. So I Googled it and then I was like, oh no, she's right. She nailed that one. And then like in that period, Asperger's got rolled into the autism spectrum in the DSM. Like the more and more I read about it, the more I was confident that that was me. Like I remember at one point, I was like pages into a research article that was written by an autistic woman who at that point, like there's still very minimal research on girls and women in autism. But like probably about 10 years ago at this point, I found this one paper by this one autistic woman who was doing autism research. And I just remember getting pages into this research paper where it said, she had like the line in the paper, if you're reading this because you think you have autism, you probably do. Or like, if you're reading this because you think you have autism and you've made it this far, you probably do. And I was like, oh yeah, called out again. So I actually went for years and years knowing this about myself, before actually like it was an employment situation that kind of drove me, that made me realize like I need the protection of the legal diagnosis. So when that legal diagnosis came through, there were like kind of two big things. Like I've been pretty comfortable with this is who I am for a long time. And I did not say that this is Kim before I started speaking, and I apologize. This is Kim. So like two big things with the diagnosis, aside from just like the legal protection of it, was like I had this moment where I realized that like all the good things about my brain were going to be true forever, but also all the complexities about socialization were also going to be true forever. And that was probably the hardest thing to reconcile. But the other realization was that now every time I ever have a conversation where I'm like, yeah, I can say I'm autistic now, I'm pretty sure I'm autistic. And anytime anyone fights with me, I can tell them where to shove it. And those were the two big things, which is like, I didn't feel like I needed to defend the diagnosis anymore because I had the legal diagnosis. The official, like I use the language of legal because I needed the legal aspect of it. But yeah, just like the realization that my brain is going to be this way forever, and coming to terms with both the good and the bad of that. And I would say the bad again goes back to like how the world is designed for not me. And then just like having the confidence to full-throated tell people you're wrong, you don't know what you're talking about. When I like talk about it and they're like, I don't think you're autistic, you're too social, or you have too much inflection in your voice. Yeah, I learned that. I earned that inflection. So yeah, that is my answer to that.
Yes, this is Lindsey. Reminder for everybody, if it's your first time joining us in this space, the reason we practice leading with this is and then saying our name is to support our ASL interpreters as they switch from one speaker to the next. This is Lindsey. Merlin, I want to stay on this question around the experience of receiving the diagnosis and how that impacted your life. And I want to hear from you because I have the sneaking suspicion there's somebody on this call who has yet to be diagnosed and is still walking around thinking, I'm a failure. And I'm hoping that your stories might be the liberation that they needed today. Merlin, what was your journey of receiving your diagnosis like?
This is interesting because I actually received my first diagnosis extremely early. I received my first diagnosis at 18 months old. I actually got diagnosed a total of 3 times. The first time was 18 months. My mom was seeing some signs that I wasn't having a quote unquote typical development. So she took me to a doctor to see what was going on. I was initially misdiagnosed with intellectual disability, and my mom was looking at, that, and she was like, this doesn't match what's going on. So she took me to a further specialist. They did a lot of tests, and that's how they found out that I had autism. Now, considering that it was 18 months and I was born in 1997, this was either in 1999 or in early 2000. So we have come a long, long way since. And so I got to hear a lot of inaccuracies about autism, like that autistic people lack imagination, they lack empathy, they don't understand anything. Basically, a lot more negative and less nuanced than what we have today. And of course, since I was diagnosed in 2000 and I was one of the few Black people that was diagnosed in 2000, there were quite a few people who were like, oh, I've never heard of someone Black being autistic. And I'm like, it exists. I don't know why you think these are mutually exclusive, but I'm Black, I'm autistic, deal with it. The second diagnosis happened in 2005. I basically had to relocate states because I'm from New Orleans, and as quite a few of you might know, in 2005, Hurricane Katrina hit New Orleans, so I was forced to relocate. I relocated to Tennessee. They wanted to get an update on my diagnosis because I was initially diagnosed with what is thankfully no longer used, called regressive autism, where your autism seems to regress, whatever that means. I still never figured that out. So then I got diagnosed with classical autism, and that is the autism I think most people think of when they think of autism, of just this very like deficit based, has difficulties, you know, such and such. That was basically my diagnosis. And what's interesting about this is that the third time I got diagnosed, it was not prompted unlike the first two. And the most interesting thing was this was prompted purely because of how I masked. They changed my diagnosis from classical to Asperger's because they were like, well, you were no longer stuttering like you were. I suppressed my stutter because people are mean and rude and I didn't want to deal with that. You know, they're like, you can feign eye contact, whereas you couldn't do that before because eye contact is personally painful to me. It's not painful to every autistic person, but it is personally painful to me. So basically, the third diagnosis was straight up, oh, well, your autism is appearing differently because, you know, you're hiding it so you can avoid or reduce stigma that happens to you. Therefore, we're going to give you a quote unquote better autism diagnosis, even though you didn't ask for this. And so that was my last diagnosis of Asperger's. And then that guy rolled into autism. And so now I'm always confused about researchers when they're like, well, which autism diagnosis did you get? I'm like, I have 3. Which one do you want me to specify? Because I despite having a mathematics degree, I don't know what the statisticians are thinking for those questions. And so I'm always confused on what to answer. So I got incredibly lucky that my autism presented in a specific way that I got diagnosed early, because almost all my other Black friends, none of them got diagnosed as early as I did. The like earliest that I know of like my Black friends who are autistic, they got diagnosed around 10 or 12 for the earliest. Some of them still have not been diagnosed to this day, even though they like meet all the criteria, you know, they're just vibing and doing their own thing. But no one wants to diagnose them because they're now adults, and the adults are using criteria that aren't meant for those folks. And so, you know, sometimes they'll go to the doctors and they're like, well, I tried to get a diagnosis of this so I can get some work accommodations. But the doctors were like, since you're not presenting in a, you know, way that is typical for white autistic boys, you're not really autistic, you know? And I'm like, do they not take into account culture or like anything? And they're like, no, that was basically my, you know, thing for diagnosis. So to those of you out there who, you know, haven't had the best luck with a diagnosis or doctors, because I know there's a lot of us out there who hasn't had the best experience, just please know you are not alone. You're not a failure. It's a system that was never designed for you that is failing you. You are not failing yourself.
This is Lindsey. Oof. Damn. So many nuggets there, Merlin. I hope everybody was taking notes. I mean, one, thinking about children not being diagnosed until the age of 10, 11, 12, maybe well into adulthood. And then think about everything that we've talked about in past unlearnings about the school to prison pipeline. Let it marinate for a second, right? If you have little Black children, little Black boys, little Black girls that are going undiagnosed, and the ways that they are disciplined versus their white or white adjacent peers. Merlin, you introduced a word that I want to make sure that everybody on the call understands. Seamus, what is masking?
Oh, this is a great question. So this is Seamus, and first of all, I have to say I absolutely loved the story and the background that both Merlin and Kim were saying. Like, it just totally resonates, and it's very similar to the experience that I've heard of similar people in Australia. You know, gaining the trust of doctors and psychologists and psychiatrists to actually not only believe, but also give them the needed medical care and the help. It's a huge problem. I mean, for me, I was diagnosed at 27 and 37. Part of it, I would say that people don't know what they don't know. It's not that they're willfully being neglectful. Rather, if they don't know what they're looking for, it makes it really difficult to actually diagnose. For instance, my partner has 2 autistic children, and is having a third one who is being diagnosed at the moment. It is really hard because me being autistic is very different to my partner's children. It's also very different to everyone else. It's a very diverse condition that I don't think a lot of people really understand. The other thing is that, especially with women, it's masking. And what a lot of people don't understand about autism, it's just not neurophysiological. It's also a cultural dimension. It's people don't understand that an autistic culture is very, very different to, let's say, a neurotypical culture. We're more direct. We say things that may be interpreted as maybe a little bit harsh, where it's not like that. Our eye contact is different. Our body language is different. How we actually process emotion is very, very different. So, for instance, masking, I do this all of the time at work. So I basically appear neurotypical so I can fit into the workplace. So I fake eye contact, I do social, I do a lot of scripting. So my start of the day is actually scripting out what I will be saying at meetings. I'm even doing that today. I made a whole heap of notes to look at what, like talking points. And it's a way of us presenting and being accepted in a neurotypical standard where it's not really comfortable. And it also means that from an accommodations point of view, it makes it very hard to get accommodations in the workplace, because as I think everyone could probably on the spectrums have as heard, it's like, oh, you don't appear that autistic. Or with mine was, I was married, but you've got a wife. You can't be autistic. You have a job. You can't be autistic. So it is really challenging from that perspective.
Yeah. This is Lindsey. Oh, I want to keep going on masking and how Seamus was sharing how that the tools, the methods, the practices, the labor that he has to engage in every day to be accepted in a society that makes the dominant group those who can present as neurotypical. Kim, what is the labor that you have to engage in to be, might I introduce a word, past accepted shame is to quote unquote assimilate.
Yeah, I was just someone put the word assimilation in the chat. And I think that's actually a really astoundingly good word for it. The analogy that I've used in the past is like it's rooted in that idea of assimilation, like someone from outside of the United States moves into the United States and are told, welcome to America, now speak English. Except for people on the spectrum, it's welcome to the neurotypical world, now speak neurotypical. And I have been just masking my whole life. And like part of the diagnostic process for me, my therapist had me bring in a bunch of pictures of me from childhood. And I had never really looked at them through this lens before. But it, like, in every photo where I'm in a group, I'm standing off to the side with like this utterly confused look on my face, like, what is happening here? And I remember moments like from when I was a kid where I would stand back and try to observe and learn the patterns and learn the language and learn like how they're physically behaving. And then once I felt like I had a grasp on it, I would join in. And even like taking that into my adulthood or even like high school or college or the workplace, like being able to stand back and observe and say, this is like the current sort of culture that I'm in. And if I want to survive here, I have to learn how to be that culture. And it is exhausting and it does contribute to burnout. And the more I feel like I need to like at this point, I'm trying to like actively turn the mask off more. And that has caused problems. Because I've been doing it for a few years now. And the more I turn the mask off, the less exhausted I feel in one way, but the more exhausted I feel in like the outlier mode. Like as an autistic person in a neurotypical world, you get to choose being exhausted by masking or being exhausted by not masking. It is exhausting either way, but I feel better about myself and who I am if I choose to be exhausted by not masking than masking. Sometimes I'll still put that mask on just to avoid issues. It's like a self-preservation situation. But it is like either choice is exhausting. It's just like which is going to help you survive better in that moment.
Oof. This is Lindsey. I know there is not a BIPOC person, an LGBTQIA identifying person, a woman in many spaces, etc. Any individual identifying in a historically excluded, previously what we call marginalized group, who's not going, I know exactly what the fuck you're talking about. Of trying to choose between the masking, as we are learning this language within this community, within this space, or we call this code switching, or we refer to this as double consciousness, as first introduced by W.E.B. Du Bois, right? Again, Kim, you're just reminding me about, again, the importance of all oppression is linked. And we so often want to default to our subordinated group status and just focus on our liberation, as opposed to as I work to liberate myself from that code switching as a Black woman in so many spaces, I must be simultaneously liberating my autistic brothers, sisters, folk, kin from the experience of masking within any given. Merlin, you had thoughts, I could tell. Just start talking.
Okay, I guess I'll talk about both masking and code switching since both apply to me. And one of the interesting things I learned very early on is if I mask, I have to choose between whether or not I also code switch or not. So on top of masking, sometimes I also have to code switch, especially in certain spaces that are hostile to me, which is even more exhausting, more effort, and I am just wiped out and tired on all of those days. But what's interesting is if I choose not to code switch, I can also choose to not mask or to mask. Now, I typically don't choose to both not code switch and not mask because that usually subjects me to a lot. But I have done that on occasions in some spaces where I felt safe, and wow, I never noticed how much energy I was devoting to those things until I stopped doing both. Versus when I was doing one or the other, I would still be fairly exhausted, but I was like, oh, my energy is getting a little bit better. My self-esteem is getting a little bit higher. I'm feeling a little bit better about myself. But when I unmaxed both and stopped doing both, I was just like, wow, it feels like I just dropped 30 pounds. Like it's like a huge relief. And I don't mean that in a fat phobic way. I'm saying that more as a like a huge burden has been lifted from my shoulders. Oh, I forgot to say that this is Merlin. So this is Merlin. So someone had also talked about like hiding your queerness, and I am asexual and also non-binary. So I get you on that too, because sometimes in certain spaces that are hostile to me in those regards, I have to like pretend that I'm interested in dating, because if I just outright say, oh, I'm single and I'm happy being single and I'm not interested in dating and I've never dated, which are all true facts. Oh boy, people are just like, you will find the one. And I'm like, I do not need your unsolicited advice. I am just explaining. Thank you. I'll turn the mic back to Lindsey now.
Oh, this is Lindsey. Thank you. We have so many questions for our panel. Laura is notifying me in the background. If I can just ask one more question, which, Seamus, you said something, and for my own naivete, I would like to ask, in this moment, is there something that I could be doing, could have done to improve this experience of us in our little bubble? Changed the lights in my view, changed the way, the line of questioning, made a more forceful doesn't sound right, the word, but a more forceful, please don't feel the need to make eye contact if that's going to take away from all of your brilliance. Is there something in this moment that we could transcend to?
This is Seamus. I actually think it's a very safe place here, because it's really asking about our experience and what makes us feel comfortable, and really understanding the nuances of being autistic, what the lived experience is. I guess the best way I can explain it, and this is to Merlin's point, because I thought the dating one, it's the thing that I'm probably asked the most about, is that it's something that a lot of people get very confused about with people on the spectrum about dating. It's just like the neurotypical community. Like, there are things that people want or don't want. It's very contextual to the individual. With my new partner, it was one of the things that she did. Like, the first time we went on a date, although I had to ask after, because she contacted me after, of all things, an autism awareness event. And it was really about accommodations of where the best place was to meet. So it was like, oh, well, where's the lighting, where it's not too noisy, where, you know, there's not going to be as many sensory problems. So it's really just asking the person. And that's from my experience. I know probably Kim and Merlin have probably got very different perspectives to myself, but I think it just really it starts with asking. You know, just understanding what that person's position is. And for me, it's like, had a great date with my new partner, Joe. And yeah, we've been together every weekend since, but it's because we're both aware of autism. It's like, it's part of our so it's part of my identity. She's also got a lot of experience with autism as well. So there's that mutual understanding. That's really, I think, what people want. Is it's not so much, you know, changing the world for everything. It's really just getting that understanding, and understanding specifically that we're not looking for privileges, we're looking for accommodations, and they're very different things. It's like, we're looking for things so we can access the world on the same footing as everyone else. Granted, different autistic people have way different needs, and there's also cultural dimensions, which I can only talk from my own perspective on.
This is Lindsey. Everybody write that down, write it across the top of your desk. We're not looking for privileges. We're looking for accommodations or equity. We're looking to just be giving the same even playing field. Wow. Which then, remember, for some of us, when we've been so accustomed to unearned privilege, equality is going to feel like lack. Let's turn to some of these questions, Laura Kay.
Yeah, this is Laura. Lindsey, I will chat you a few of these, and I also invite people to put your questions in the chat if you have them. You can also come off mic if you feel comfortable that way. You can use the raise hand feature on Zoom as well.
Thank you. Lorelei, do you want to ask this question, or do you want me to pose it for you?
Hi, the question that I asked about, if you could please say more about the legal impact of getting formally diagnosed.
Thank you and welcome, Lorelei. Lorelei has a question about the legal impact of that formal diagnosis. Kim, you want to start?
Yeah, this is Kim. I think it's a little bit of a fresh and spicy question for me. So at my last job, I had a manager who, in my performance review and in some other meetings, and this was before my diagnosis. So let's back up a little bit. This is what triggered the pursuit for diagnosis. In a couple of meetings, she explained that we were having some issues, and I tried to explain that I think the issues that we're having are rooted in me being autistic. And she kept using the language of like alleged autism. And I asked her point blank if my job was at risk, and she just kind of shrugged. So at that point, I knew I was in trouble in that context. So I started pursuing diagnosis. It was hard to find someone who would take me, an adult who was gainfully employed for a few years at that point. So I basically just took the first person who would take me. Blue light special diagnosis, if you will. And that kind of settled that for that moment, because I was able to go back to that manager and say, hey, I'm diagnosed now. And that manager actually shifted very much and became a great manager for me. She went on to learn a lot about managing people on the spectrum, was more open to having conversations about the issues we were having rather than just being like, you're wrong, you need to fix. A few years later, fast forward to last summer, my new manager, I actually found out that she had been speaking disparagingly behind my back to coworkers, and she was specifically naming autism as a hindrance to me getting my work done. So when I reported that, I actually there were two converging storylines going on at the same time. One of them was a restructure that was led by the person who was talking about my autism behind my back. The other one was all of this stuff happening, just shitty behavior happening behind my back on part of my manager. And those two things kind of converged within about 48 hours of one another. I got laid off in a restructure, and I had reported her about 24 hours earlier for the problems I was having with her. I'm so thankful I had the diagnosis to submit that report, because what happened at that point was that triggered an investigation. And there was a pretty large scale investigation that went around just kind of measuring different coworkers' experiences of her versus me, and asking the question if she had spoken disparagingly about my autism behind my back. And as a result of that investigation, she lost her job too. Because it was found to be true that she had been speaking disparagingly about my autism behind my back. And I would not have had the legal case for that without the diagnosis. So that's kind of what I'm talking about in terms of legal protection. It gives me the grounds to say, I am a protected class, and you cannot treat me like that. The end.
This is Lindsey. Say that last line. Say it again for the cheap seats.
Oh, you actually literally want me to repeat it?
Yeah, loud.
This is Kim. I am a protected class. You cannot treat me like that.
Oh, this is Lindsey. We're going to make shirts. We've got a lot of questions here still, so I'm going to go to the next one. B, would you like to come off of mute and...
I'm actively trying to turn my treadmill off so that it hopefully isn't noisy. I submitted a lot of questions, so I don't know which question you're referring to specifically.
You have a question about the percentage of those with disabilities?
Yeah, I'd submitted a question earlier in the chat about, what's the advice for instructional designers on making more equitable training? Because with a demanding job that has a lot of production coming through, you're just trying to get something out there that accommodates 80%, unfortunately. It's just not something that is paid enough attention to, I think. And so I was wondering if that's something that you can even ask your company, and maybe it's just worth the question. But to ask how many people are suffering from some type of disability, or even what it is exactly, so we can tailor the experiences more to those people that face that. We don't usually do closed captioning on anything, but we do sound, or we have voiceover and things like that. We've just been incorporating more elements. So I'll just stop there.
This is Lindsey. Great question, B. Seamus, you're doing a lot of work with orgs. Yes, do you want to take that one?
Oh, that's an interesting one. See, the thing is that I'm a UX designer, so part of it is actually explaining the experience that a person has with a product. So if you think about it, it's the word would be phenomenology. So part of it is that you really need to get the users involved. So those end people who are going to be interacting with the system, it's not necessarily a statement of neurotypical versus neurodivergent. It's more certain people are going to be interacting with whatever digital product or whatever experience you have or service design. It's getting impact about understanding what the behavioral traits they are. What are they trying to drive as a behavioral outcome? The other aspect of it is that there are a lot of companies that can assist in this. So their expertise are about, let's say, tailoring it for someone with dyspraxia. If you're, let's say, have a like a more production focused thing where it's using a lot of the mechanics, or there's others who deal with Tourette's or autism or ADHD. So there are a lot of support networks, and I have noticed that in Australia at the moment. So part of the reason is that we've got this thing called the NDIS, which is it's a disability insurance scheme. So there's a lot of trade-off of consultancies and very specific companies that actually drive for these sort of outcomes and build basically products or help build an HR program, if you will. So there are a lot of supports, and the fact is that, I mean, I'm in Australia at the moment, and where the barriers aren't there, the geographical barriers aren't there anymore. So there's so many resources. Yes, that's the NDIS. I can put a link up.
This is Lindsey. Thank you, Seamus. If I could add to what Seamus offered, oftentimes when we're making the case in organizations, instead of focusing on percentages within the organization, we focus on percentages within the population around the organization. So if we take into account that, in general, and please, anybody correct me on my statistic here, but in general, we can expect about 30 to 40% of a population in a given area to have or be living with a disability. And so I don't need to know that right now in your organization, 30 to 40% are identifying as disabled. In your area where your organization is placed, we know that a large, well, almost half, right? And that's just who's been diagnosed, so of the population. And so taking that number into our design when we're doing organizational design. Also adding to that remember we're, as Janine Spence always reminds us, we're designing for who will be here, not who is here. Is that useful at all?
Yes, thank you. And I don't know if you can see me nodding, so I'm gonna come off mute.
This is Lindsey. Thank you, B. We have a follow-up question. This is from Bernie D. Can we get examples of types of accommodations that we can offer at work, regardless of having a medical diagnosis? Ideally, it would be customized for each individual, but it would be great to have a starting point, hearing how challenging a diagnosis can be to make accommodations available, irregardless of the diagnosis. Merlin, do you want to start on that one?
Specifically for work, one aspect that I see a lot of folks really wanting, and this is broader than just autism, this has gone for everyone, One specific accommodation is to be flexible in terms of where a person can work from if said work allows for it. Like, for example, some people do best hybrid, some people do best remote fully, and some people do best like in person all the time. Some people just need that separation of life. Some people do best with a mixture, and some people do best remotely because that's just how they work. I guess another big thing that could be regardless of diagnosis, that's something companies could definitely work on, is accommodating for different types of communication styles. And that does apply to neurotypicals too, because neurotypicals don't communicate in just one style. They have various different styles that are influenced by their culture and other things of that nature. So just being accommodating towards that is not just going to be accommodating towards autistic people, but towards other folks who also get impacted by those communication rigidness that is embedded in a lot of problematic stuff. Lastly, I guess one thing that would be more focused towards those with differences in sensory would be like, let employees, as long as it doesn't like break any fire codes or that, just like alter their environment to their liking. Like, for example, some people have difficulties with fluorescent light. So, you know, if they can replace that with something that doesn't hurt their eyes or causes pain, and it's not going to actually cause a problem per se with anyone else, why not just let them go ahead and have their office either with no light or with an alternative lighting that doesn't actually hurt them? That's just one quick and easy way to accommodate folks. Or, you know, just various little things like that where you can have areas of the office that are going to be quieter than others, because some people like a lot of noise to concentrate. I don't understand it because I have sensitivity to noise, but some people require a lot of noise to engage. But other people like me require relative low amounts and get distracted easily. So just basically restructuring your environment to accommodate a wide range of folks will definitely accommodate autistic folks. And not only will it accommodate us, it'll just make everyone happier. Just, you know, find a little place where you can vibe and do your best work, because I don't like the framing of, you know, just bringing everyone up to equal. Why not just have everyone accelerate at their best instead? So that way we can all just, you know, be happy and do our best.
This is Lindsey. Thank you for that. We established on this call that Merlin is almost half my age, so let us be led by the youth because they've got so much to teach us and are going to change this ship, turn it around. As we prepare to leave this space, and think about going back into our communities, going back into our homes, one of the things that's really coming to mind for me is, again, how many people are so quick to write on their company's website or on their job ads or in their equity statement that we provide accommodations for all. This is a space where all can experience welcome and belonging. And we've gotten to hear from 3 of our leaders about how many people, institutions, systems, organizations have fallen short of what I'm sure was a very prettily written DEI or equity statement. And so taking the insights that we've heard today and going back into our spaces and saying, hey, we've got this pretty little statement here, but in what ways are we actually supporting our autistic team members, our colleagues, our friends, our community members? What norms and standards are we willing to cede in order to really live by this statement? Or, as I always say, if you're in an organization, you're like, hey, racism has worked for us. Let's just stick with it. Put that on your equity statement, right? Or if you're like, we don't really want to support autistic people, put that in your equity statement. That way you're not inviting people to harm. But if you have it there, then you should be prepared to do the work. Live your values. Live your values. Kim, Seamus, Merlin, as we promised, what an amazing discussion, conversation, opportunity to be in community with you and your wisdom. Thank you for sharing with all of us. Please, everybody, take a moment as you leave this space. Go find Seamus, go find Kim, go find Merlin and the work that they are doing, and look for ways to support and elevate it or to get involved. I also see April L here in the chat is talking about some ways to get involved. This is what I love about our community. Let's move from talk to action. And as we leave this space, I want us all to really take a moment today, tomorrow, whenever, to interrogate that message that still lives in so many of us. I'll be honest with you. I grew up in a time, in a space in the education system where it was very much like those kids, right? Is anybody my age old? Where, you know, what Merlin was describing, that was not the norm when I was in school. And that seeps into our brains, into our bodies like a bad fart, and it exists in there. We cannot change what we are not prepared to be honest within ourselves to confront. Do some work, get your journals out, get on to your practice, and interrogate those messages that still live there, percolating, taking up space, so that when it comes to actually applying your advocacy in the disability space, in the autism awareness space, you'll be able to close the gap between your values and how you actually show up. Does that make sense? All right, beloved. Good to see you as always this first Wednesday of the month. We will see you next month for more unlearning together. Love you as always. Bye. Oh, let's take a deep stretch or whatever feels good for your body. Oh, Seamus, what part of Australia are you in?
So I'm in Sydney, and we've gone from all types of weather. So yeah, it was super, super hot 2 weeks ago, and now it's just gone to that weather change, you know, the cross season, and it's actually quite cool.
I lived in Brisbane, Queensland for 10 years.
Oh, whoa, that's awesome.
Yeah, so I was like, another discussion we'll have in the background. So I lived there, got married, had children. We moved back home. Unfortunately, we separated. And so Dale is from Brisbane, and his mom is actually here visiting from Brisbane as well. So I will be happy to tell them that I had an Australian panelist on today.
Oh, no, that is so cool. I love it. It's like the connections are so close. Like for example, when I did some work, I used to do broadcast weather. So all over the world was awesome. The funniest thing was nearly everyone in the team was autistic. Well, it's like you've got people who are all interested in weather in a very, very deep sort of a way. Yeah. And I was on so the two biggest producers of weather graphic systems are in Norway and in New Zealand, which is really, really weird. and I was in Norway, and I was on a dock freezing in Bergen, and I ran into a person I went to school with. It's like crazy.
Oh my goodness. However big the world is, it's just as small, right?
Mm.
How
Oh,
did everybody
absolutely.
feel about the show? How did you?
Amazing. Sorry. I'm just so happy.
Laura, go
It took,
first.
I'm sorry. I usually wait for everybody to go first, but I'm not waiting this time. I just want to say it was so incredible, and it took me a moment to transition and just message the ASL team. But yeah, like the comments were, I mean, people were saying there was someone in here who realized today that they were autistic. And they were saying something about Kim's story of having, someone yell at you on the way out, basically. And this person in the comments said, "Yes, I realized today." And it's just
I didn't
like,
see that.
Marilyn, Seamus, any thoughts? Feel good about it? Any things you
Yeah.
wish you had said?
I want to know what book Seamus was referring to with the inferiorization, because I have heard of the concept in so many different ways, but not that specific terminology, and I want to know more.
Oh, that came from, I did a philosophy course, and it kind of got me hooked, and there were basically 3 books that I was just like hooked on. The first one that kind of was an introduction was by Albert Camus. And so Myth of Sisyphus is amazing, absolutely life-changing book for me. The other one that just resonated from an autistic perspective, although I can't really talk about the cultural perspective because I have no frame of reference to it, is Frantz Fanon. So his book is Black Skin, White Mask, and where he talks about the challenges. So he's the amount of struggle he had is amazing. And his book was actually part of his dissertation for when he became a psychologist in France. So he's absolutely amazing background. But the thing that really kind of resonated when he was talking about dominant cultures and the differences, and it just blew my mind when I was reading. I'm just like, oh my God, like he explained so many experiences. So he's very, very influential. I'll put up a link for you. Yeah, so he was basically a French psychologist. So I'll just put up the Stanford University one, which is really cool. Absolutely mind-blowing book.
As we all copy that. Merlin, I thought you did such an amazing job of unpacking intersectionality around being autistic, Black, LGBTQIA+, like just sometimes within disability spaces, just like in historically queer spaces, it can default to white, male, gay. And in this space, it can also. And so I thought the way you introduced that early in the conversation for people to, yep, intersectionality again. Great job. Great job.
Yeah, I was trying to also mind, my privilege as well, because I am thin. So when I said that 30-pound comment, my first thought was, oh no, I made a blunder. Let me go ahead and correct that now. So
Thank you
that
for
was
correcting it.
Yes,
So,
and what's
yeah.
beautiful, this is that space where we are modeling too, again and again, the ability to call oneself in, right? Oh, I noticed it. Let me call myself in. So many people respond to just that, even in this classroom of like, oh, that's what it would look like for me to make a mistake and correct my mistake and keep talking, right? So expertly done. Yes, yes. As we leave this space, anything that you want to leave here before you go there?
I'm just blown away with the panelists. I just was like, oh my God, you know, it's a very different perspective that I haven't seen. Yeah, it's no, I loved every second of it. I was hoping could add to the conversation, but no, it's like Kim, like it was amazing hearing your perspective, and Merlin, I haven't had a different cultural like perspective before. So it was just amazing to get that level of insight. It's like I'm like, oh, I'll have to follow you on the social and that, and it's like I hope you'd like write more on the subject. It's like people need to know. It's just so good to hear and so good to have that reference to.
And I hope you as well, Seamus. It was all three of you. There was not a moment in today's episode that wasn't just fire. And I never get to read the comments until afterwards. So I hope you have taken a look there. And as we said, if we touch one person who, more important, yes, there's the systems and structures, but if somebody can begin the process of liberating themselves, then this, hour and a half together, we've been used. We've been used. Well, Laura and I keep talking about getting everybody, all of our panelists over, almost 2 years of episodes now together for some huge international DEI conference where we just like bring all our people and then we solve the world's challenges. Probably over chips, and I mean like corn chips, Seamus, not like French fries, although we have fries. Both. Christina, Junie, I hope you'll join us. So stay tuned for said international conference that we have absolutely no money to fund, but we'll figure it out. And more. Thank you, everyone, for making space for today.
Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you. This has been great.
Thanks, Pro Bono crew. Great work, everybody. Take care.